So we had the topic on nonverbal communication by Lizzie, Joy, Amanda, and Casey. And the question is, should Cornerstone students get training in nonverbal communication in preparation for missions trips? So first we want to talk about what is nonverbal communication. The definition of nonverbal communication is those aspects of communication such as gestures and facial expressions that do not involve verbal communication, but which may include nonverbal aspects of speech itself, including accent, tone of voice, and speed of speaking. Some other more common nonverbal communications are hand gestures, facial expressions, and body language. And nonverbal communication also does not have to be something that's intentional. For example, if you're trying a new food and you say you like it, but your face might show otherwise. And the six universal emotions that can be detected throughout all cultures are surprise, disgust, anger, fear, sadness, and joy.
So we just heard about the six universal emotions, and now we're going to see how nonverbal communication relates to science. So for science, there are three main principles: objectivity, rationality, and the use of the empirical. For objectivity, the six universal emotions are relatable across all cultures and people. This makes it more credible when using nonverbal communication because everyone can understand it. However, on the other side, nonverbal communication is very subjective because it's dependent on one's culture and how they perceive it. It's all about what people think you are communicating. So there is a limit to the objectivity of nonverbal communication. For rationality, all cultures will have some universal and some different nonverbal communication. This is important because with the universal, we can easily relate, but it is important that Cornerstone students and other cultures understand those differences so that we are not offensive or hinder relationship building. And also, when using positive nonverbal communication, one can benefit relationship building and bridge that gap. For the use of the empirical, nonverbal communication is completely observed through one's eyes. It is very observational, so body language, facial cues, and hand gestures are important for this aspect of science. So we did some research to determine if this would be good for Cornerstone students, and the first study measured patient anxiety levels from doctor visits. So in this study, patients were studied and analyzed in pre-consultation and then throughout their visit when visiting their general practitioner. They were self-assessed and also assessed through video monitoring and by professionals. The purpose of this was to equip doctors to communicate and relate to anxious patients just by recognizing their nonverbal cues and by seeing the effects of those in their relationships with the doctors. So here's some critical analysis of the study. The control group was made up of 707 participants who were blind to what they were doing and being measured, giving them just less issues and more credibility. The sample size was nearly 2,100 adult patients, and they were all studied in adult Dutch culture from 142 general practitioners. 1,388 of these patients completed a pre-consultation questionnaire, and the assignment of groups for who did the pre-consultation questionnaire and who did not were randomly assigned. The study said there was no difference in ages, genders, sexes, anything like that. The information allowing replication makes the study seem pretty easy. There was a video set up and the analysis was done through well-known assessment, so someone could replicate this study. However, there was not specific details on what the questions were. They were never listed, so someone would have to come up with their own questionnaires. For anecdotal evidence, none was found, but the survey was based on subjective material, so it is limited and weak depending on someone's own interpretation. This was a peer-reviewed study, though. It was published in Emerald's textbook, Health Education, and also given on the school's database under peer-reviewed. So it does have credibility. For the variables, the independent variable would be the participants in the study, as they were random. The dependent variable was patient anxiety levels, since that's what was being measured. And there were many controls. The video setup was the same for all patients, and then all of the assessments in the pre-consultation, video analysis, and nonverbal analysis were all by credible different systems and scales that are well known. And lastly, the nationality of participants were the same across the board. So results, most were shown to have anxiety levels, and a third of them had very high anxiety when meeting with their doctors. This was, again, assessed through these tests that most use to determine attitudes of patients, and the implications that anxious patients rarely express their emotions explicitly, but act in nonverbal ways and different than those who are not anxious. So recognizing those for general practitioners is crucial to be able to read their emotional signals. So how this applies to Cornerstone students, anxiety can definitely hinder relationship building, so students need to know how to address that, recognize it, and deal with them to connect with individuals. The students themselves may be anxious and need to understand what signs that would be like. And in the case, it was shown that most anxious patients don't express their anxiety, so it's critical that students can recognize these interactions and make others feel welcome.
The second study that we looked at how leaders influence followers with nonverbal communication. So the summary for this study was that participants took a survey after watching a video of a leader speaking, and they were testing to see whether or not the participants felt distant or connected to the speaker based on the speaker's nonverbal gestures. And each participant watched a different video where the speaker showed different gestures, and that was positive gestures, negative gestures, or none at all. And the purpose of this experiment was to address the relationship between the leader's use of specific hand gestures and the follower's attraction or connection to the leader. So here is the critical analysis for this study. The control group and sample size was 89 males and 121 females, so 210 was the sample size. The assignment of the subjects. So participants were shown one of 3 videos, each showing different hand gestures, the positive, defensive, or none. They were to watch the video and respond to some questions after that, where they answered whether they felt connected or distant to the speaker. The video that each participant got was randomly selected. The information allowing replication. So there was enough information provided if we wanted to conduct our own study, we could do that. We would just have to read in detail and know exactly what they did to replicate the experiment. There was enough information for us to do that. There were no anecdotal evidence in the article journal that we looked at. And for peer review, it comes from a leadership and organizational development journal. For the different variables, the independent variables were that there were different hand gestures used by the speaker in the video for the different participants. And the dependent variable was whether or not the participants felt distant or connected to the speaker. And the controlled was that each video shown had the same verbal content to it, even though the gestures were different, the thoughts that the speaker was saying was the same. So the results and conclusions for study 2. The results was that participants perceived leaders with no hand gestures and defensive hand gestures to be distant or non-immediate, and the leader with positive hand gestures to be more immediate or attractive. The results given from the study was in paragraph form rather than in tables or charts. And conclusions that we can take from this study is that it's important to use positive hand gestures and body language when trying to communicate with others, especially when you're immersed in another culture. It's super important to know positive hand gestures that they use and common ones that they use so you can really connect with them. So, importance of learning nonverbal communication. So, not making hand gestures at all in order to avoid offending people still isn't good. No gestures is just as bad as defensive hand gestures. So when you are in a situation where you may not know what's a positive hand gesture for their culture, like making no hand gestures at all is still, you're not connecting with them. In order to reach out to people on a missions trip and have them actually like receive the gospel message and like know what we are saying, it's important to learn to know how to use their most common positive hand gestures in order for them to like receive your message and what you're trying to say, which would be the gospel in a missions trip perspective. So we do support Cornerstone students to take a class that would help teach them nonverbal communication and body language. It's important in order to connect with people in other cultures.
The Christian's perspective of nonverbal communication is important because, for one, it is our job to communicate the Word of God cross-culturally, even if we do not speak the same language. We will cross paths with people who can't communicate with us, but nonverbal communication can help us connect when trying to share the Word of Christ. Which leads to the next point, that nonverbal communication can convey our emotions of God's creation to all people. If we are in a foreign country surrounded by people who can't speak our language, we may want to share our feelings of God's beauty with others, and nonverbal communication can help us convey those emotions. So, should Cornerstone students get training in nonverbal communication in preparation for mission trips? We say yes. Benefits: students will have a better understanding of how to relate to their culture and others, which is important to be aware of the world. Students will be more successful at relationship building, whether it be for work, family, or friends. Students will have a greater likelihood of effectively sharing the gospel, which is important because it is our job to share the word of Christ. And lastly, student experience will be maximized. As students, we want the best when we go to college, so this is important when we go into the real world to have nonverbal communication.